My name is Patrice Holloway. I was a landscape architect in Asheville, North Carolina for 23 years. I designed gardens for a living. I spent my professional life thinking about how living things grow, how they reach toward light, how roots find water in the dark without being able to see where they are going. I mention my work because, in retrospect, it was preparing me for something without my knowing it. The way a dream sometimes makes sense only after the day that follows it. In July of 2016, at the age of 57, I was struck by lightning on the back porch of my house during a summer thunderstorm. And I was dead for somewhere between 4 and 6 minutes. And what I was shown in that time rearranged my understanding of reality so completely that the woman who came back to that porch is a fundamentally different person from the woman the lightning hit. I am still getting to know her. I find her more interesting than the previous version, which I say with no disrespect to the previous version, who worked very hard and deserved better than to be struck by lightning on her own porch. Let me tell you about the previous version first. I grew up in Charlotte, North Carolina, the eldest daughter of a high school principal father and a mother who was a seamstress of extraordinary skill and very little patience for imprecision. My mother could look at a bolt of fabric and calculate how many yards a pattern would require to the quarter inch. And she brought this same precise attention to every other aspect of her life, including the raising of her children, which was effective and occasionally exhausting. My father was a man of enormous warmth and genuine intellectual curiosity, who read 2 newspapers every morning before school, and who believed with complete sincerity that a good question was more valuable than a good answer. I got the precision from my mother and the curiosity from my father, and spent most of my life trying to reconcile the two. I studied landscape architecture at NC State, which at the time had one of the finest programs in the country, and which suited my particular combination of artistic inclination and structural thinking. I graduated in 1982, worked for a large firm in Charlotte for 6 years, and then moved to Asheville in 1988, which was before Asheville became the thing Asheville eventually became, when it was still primarily a mountain town with good bones and cheap studio space, and a river that nobody had yet figured out how to make boutique. I started my own practice in 1993. I built it slowly and with intention, the way I believed gardens should be built. I was married to Marcus for 19 years. Marcus was a jazz musician who played piano at a restaurant downtown 3 nights a week and taught private lessons the other days, and approached the world with the relaxed certainty of a man who had made his peace with his choices early and saw no reason to revisit them. We were happy. We were also, eventually, better friends than spouses, and we arrived at that conclusion together and without drama in 2009, which I consider one of our joint achievements. We had one daughter, Simone, who was 31 in 2016 and living in Durham, working for a non-profit focused on urban green spaces. I took a particular satisfaction in her career that I recognized as the specific vanity of a parent whose child has found a version of their own work. I was not religious. I want to be precise about this, in the way I have tried to be precise about other people's positions in these conversations. Because the word religious covers a vast range of territory. I was spiritual, in the way that people who spend their professional lives working with living systems sometimes become spiritual, with a deep appreciation for patterns, for the intelligence embedded in natural processes, for the way a garden left alone for a season will organize itself according to principles that no landscape architect designed. I believed in something underlying all of that. I did not have a name for it, and I did not attend services, and I did not read theology. But I felt it on good mornings, in the way a hillside covered in native wildflowers feels when the light comes across it at the right angle. I thought that was enough. I thought I understood the basic shape of things. I did not understand the basic shape of things. I had seen the hem of the garment and mistaken it for the whole cloth. It is a Tuesday evening in July of 2016. Asheville summers operate on a specific meteorological schedule that residents learn to read the way sailors read water. The mornings are clear and mountain cool. The afternoons build heat until somewhere between 3 and 6 o'clock the sky makes its decision. And the decision is almost always a thunderstorm of genuine commitment. I had worked in my studio until 5, come home to the house I had lived in for 20 years on a hillside in the North Asheville neighborhood, and was sitting on my back porch with a glass of iced tea, watching the storm approach from the southwest the way I had watched hundreds of Asheville summer storms approach. The sky was doing what it does, that particular green-grey colour that has its own name in the vocabulary of people who pay attention to sky, that colour that means business. I knew I should go inside. I want to say that clearly so that no one makes my mistake. I knew I should go inside. I had been watching lightning for 20 minutes, and I was on an elevated porch on a hillside with a metal railing, and I knew, with the full knowledge of an adult with functioning faculties, that I should take my iced tea inside and watch the storm through the window like a sensible person. I did not. The storm was beautiful. I have spent my life arguing that beauty is worth some inconvenience, and the universe apparently decided to test the limits of that position. The lightning did not announce itself. I want to dispel the idea that there is a warning, a build-up, a sense of danger, a moment to brace. There was the storm and the iced tea and the green-grey sky and the smell of rain coming, which is one of the finest smells available anywhere on earth. And then there was something that was not an experience in any framework I had previously used for the word experience. It was more like being the inside of an explosion than being near one. Every cell in my body receiving the same information at the same time, which is too much information for a nervous system to process, and so the nervous system, sensibly, stops processing. I learned later from my neighbour Dorothy Sims, who was watching from her own porch, and who has never quite recovered from what she witnessed, that I was thrown backward approximately 4 feet by the strike, that the metal railing I had been holding showed significant burn marks, and that Dorothy called 911 while running toward me across our adjoining yards in the rain, without stopping to consider whether running toward a person who had just been struck by lightning in an active thunderstorm was advisable. I am grateful she did not stop to consider it. I was not breathing when Dorothy reached me. My heart was not beating. Dorothy, who had retired from a career as a dental hygienist, and who had last used CPR training in a recertification course 4 years prior that she had complained about attending, performed chest compressions on my wet porch in the rain for 6 minutes until the paramedics arrived. I did not know any of this while it was happening. I was somewhere else entirely. Here is where I have to ask something of you. I have told this story many times now, to Simone, to Marcus, to my friend group, to a therapist, to a researcher at the University of Virginia who studies near-death experiences and who interviewed me for 3 hours and asked questions of a precision that would have impressed my mother. Each time I tell it, I find the language slightly more inadequate than the time before. Not because the memory fades. It does not fade, which is itself one of its unusual qualities, but because the distance between what happened and what words can hold keeps revealing itself to be larger than I had estimated. I am going to do my best. I am going to ask you to receive it with the same openness my father valued in a good question. What I encountered was not a place. I want to establish that first. I had a framework before the lightning of the afterlife as a location. Somewhere you go. A destination with properties that could in principle be described the way you would describe any other place. What I found was that this framework was built on a category error so fundamental that correcting it requires dismantling most of what ordinary language assumes about space and time and the relationship between the two. What I was shown was the fabric. I am going to use that word, fabric, because my mother was a seamstress, and because it is the closest word I have for what I encountered, and because, in retrospect, I think the word may have been chosen for me specifically, the same way the NDE accounts I later read described information arriving in forms tailored to the receiver. The fabric of reality. The underlying structure of everything that exists. It was not something I observed from outside. I was inside it. I was made of it. The distinction between observer and observed, which I had taken as a fundamental given of experience my entire life, was not present in that space. There was no looking at the fabric from a distance. There was only being the fabric, temporarily aware of being the fabric, which is different from all ordinary experience, in a way that makes the phrase different from all ordinary experience seem like a drastic understatement. What the fabric was made of, and again I am reaching the limit of language while asking you to come past the limit with me. What it was made of was not matter. It was not energy in the scientific sense, though energy is a closer word than matter. It was more like awareness, like consciousness woven into structure. Like the universe is not a place where consciousness sometimes occurs, but a consciousness that sometimes takes the form of places. I understand that what I just wrote sounds like something you might read on a motivational poster in a yoga studio. I want to be clear that I am a landscape architect with a professional background in horticultural science and structural engineering, and that I resisted this description for a long time before accepting that it is the most accurate one I have. The fabric had a quality that I can only describe as loving. Not emotional in the way human love is emotional, not contingent, not directed specifically at one person rather than another, not capable of withdrawal or disappointment. Loving in the way that gravity is gravitational, as a property of the structure itself, not an attitude held by something inside the structure. The fabric was loving, the way water is wet. That quality was not something it did. It was something it was. I was shown patterns within the fabric. And this is the part of the experience that most directly addresses what the title of this story promises: the fabric of reality. So I want to try to be as specific as I can, even though specificity keeps failing me. Every living thing has a thread in the fabric. Not a metaphorical thread, a literal one, or something so close to literal that the distinction collapses in the space I was in. I could perceive, within the structure I was inside, the threads of every living thing that exists or has ever existed, and they were not separate. They were woven. They intersected and influenced each other in patterns of extraordinary complexity and extraordinary order. And the order was not mechanical. It was not the order of a machine following rules. It was the order of something that was itself aware, that was organizing according to an intelligence woven into the fabric rather than imposed on it from outside. I saw my own thread. I want to say that carefully because it was both the most personal and the most humbling moment of the experience. I saw the thread that was me, not just my current life, but the full length of it, past and future, simultaneously visible, in the way that a completed tapestry lets you see the whole design at once. I saw where my thread crossed other threads. I saw the effect of those crossings, not in a judgmental sense, not as a ledger of good and bad, but as a pattern of influence, of how the presence or absence of genuine connection altered the design for both threads involved. I saw Simone's thread crossing mine, and I will not try to describe what that looked like, except to say that I understood for the first time what my mother had meant every time she said, which she said often, and which I had received as an unremarkable expression of maternal sentiment, that children were the most important work. Not because she told me this, but because I could see it in the structure. The crossing of those threads had changed the design in ways that rippled outward into connections I could not have predicted, and that the fabric clearly could. I received something specific, a knowing, arriving in the way I have described and other NDE survivors have described, complete, instant, without ambiguity. And what I received was this: what you call death is the thread returning to the loom, not ending, not disappearing, returning to the source that produced it, carrying everything it encountered, adding to the pattern permanently, becoming available to be woven again in whatever form the pattern requires. I want to sit with that for a moment, because I think it is the most important thing I came back with. The thread returns to the loom. Everything the thread encountered, every crossing, every connection, every moment of genuine contact with another thread, is carried back and becomes part of the source. Nothing is lost. The pattern of the whole is permanently altered by what the thread lived. And the thread is not gone. It is in the loom, which is where it came from, which is what it was made of, which is what everything is made of. There were specific people present. My grandmother on my mother's side, Nana Ruth, who died in 1994, and who was the person in my childhood who sat with me on porches during summer storms, and pointed out the shapes in lightning-lit clouds, who was, I realized in that space, the first person who taught me to pay attention to the world with genuine curiosity. She was there with the complete reality of herself, not diminished, not generic, not a symbol. Herself, her specific warmth and her specific humor, and the way she smelled like the particular face powder she had used for 40 years. She did not communicate in words. What arrived was everything she would have wanted to tell me since 1994, which was considerable because Nana Ruth had opinions, and they did not stop accumulating just because she died. The return was sudden in a way that I was told, in the space, to expect, but that I was not entirely prepared for when it happened. It was not unpleasant. It was abrupt. The porch came back first as sound, rain, Dorothy's voice, the specific acoustics of my backyard, which I have heard 10,000 times, and which I now understand as a small and particular and irreplaceable piece of the fabric that I was astonishingly fortunate to be returned to. Then pain. The residual effects of a lightning strike on a human body are not minor, and I will spare you the full inventory, but the central item is a burning sensation in the right hand and forearm where I had been holding the railing that suggests the phrase "struck by lightning" is doing significant understatement work. I also had, I later learned, a fern-shaped burn mark on my left shoulder, which is called a Lichtenberg figure, and which is what lightning leaves on skin, and which I still have, faded now, and which I consider the most interesting scar I have encountered in 57 years of collecting them. I spent 5 days at Mission Hospital in Asheville. Cardiac monitoring, neurological evaluation, the specific battery of tests that the medical community applies to a person who has been struck by lightning and survived, which is a smaller club than you might think, and a larger club than I would have guessed before joining it. My cardiologist, Dr. Michael Torres, told me that the absence of lasting cardiac damage in my case was, in his phrasing, not the expected outcome given the presentation. I said, "I know. I was somewhere else." He wrote something down. Simone drove from Durham and was at my bedside within 4 hours of Dorothy's call. She sat beside me with the compressed, careful expression she gets when she is managing fear with effort, which I recognized because it is the same expression her father makes, and which I had apparently never noticed was also hers, until I was lying in a hospital bed with new information about what threads look like when they cross. I told her, on day 2, what I had seen in the fabric. She listened with the full attention of her father's daughter, which is the greatest attention available in our family. When I finished, she said, "Mom, your whole life has been about how things grow. I think maybe you just saw the system they grow in." She is a smart woman, my daughter. I do not say that as flattery. I say it as information. The integration took longer than I anticipated, and I want to be honest about the texture of it, because I think it serves people better than a tidy account of immediate transformation. The first 6 months were disorienting in a specific way. I had returned from a space of total clarity into a world organized around assumptions that I now knew were incomplete. And the gap between those two things created a kind of static that I did not know how to manage. I went back to work too soon. I redesigned a garden in Weaverville that the client had specifically not asked me to redesign, because I could see, in a way I had not been able to see before, what the garden was supposed to become. And I got ahead of the client's permission, which is a professional error I had not made in 20 years. I started therapy with a woman in Asheville named Dr. Caroline Bridges, who had worked with other NDE survivors and who helped me understand that the integration of a profound experience into an ordinary life is not a problem to be solved, but a practice to be maintained. I started meditating, not because I thought meditation would replicate the experience. Nothing replicates the experience, but because it offered the closest available analogue to the quality of attention the space had shown me was possible. I changed my practice. I began designing with a principle I had always intellectually endorsed, but had not previously understood from the inside: that a garden is not a design imposed on a landscape, but a collaboration with it. That the landscape has its own intelligence, and the gardener's job is to listen to it rather than override it. I had believed this for 23 years. After the lightning, I knew it. Marcus and I have dinner every few weeks. He is still playing piano on Wednesday and Friday nights at the same restaurant, which has changed owners twice, but somehow always finds its way back to needing a jazz pianist on the small stage near the window. He listened to the full account with the attentiveness of a musician who understands that the space between notes is part of the composition. He said when I finished, "Patrice, you have always been the most precise person I know, and you just described something that has no edges. How does that feel?" I said, "Like finally understanding a piece of music you have been hearing your whole life." He said, "Yes, that sounds about right. Here is what I want to leave with you. You are a thread in a fabric of unimaginable beauty and complexity and love. Not metaphorically, structurally. The connections you make with other people, the genuine ones, the full attention ones, the ones where you are actually present and not just nearby, those connections alter the pattern permanently. They do not disappear when the moment ends. They do not disappear when you end. They are woven in. Every living thing around you is a thread in the same fabric. The people you love, the people who frustrate you, the stranger in the line at the grocery store who is having a terrible day that you know nothing about. All threads, all woven, all affecting the pattern in ways that ripple further than any of us can see from inside the design. We are not separate beings who occasionally connect. We are connection that occasionally experiences itself as separate beings. The separateness is the local experience. The connection is the actual structure. We are going to go back to the loom, all of us, and everything we carried will go back with us, and the pattern will be richer for the thread we were. Nothing is lost, nothing is wasted. Not the grief, and not the beauty, and not the ordinary Tuesday evening on a porch with iced tea, watching a storm come in from the southwest. Pay attention to this, all of it. We are made of something extraordinary, and we are going home to it. And the going home is not the end of the thread. It is the thread remembering what it was made of. We are going to be more than okay. We are going to be everything we always were and did not yet know how to see.